Something snapped in that hearing room, and you could feel it immediately, not slowly, not subtly, instantly. Dan Goldman didn't walk in there to ask polite questions or follow a script everyone had already seen before. He walked in carrying something very different: documents. Real ones. The kind that don't just raise questions, they force answers. And within seconds of him speaking, the entire atmosphere changed. Because this wasn't just another political exchange. This was confrontation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Bondi, I went over to the department yesterday for a couple of hours to review some of the unredacted materials. And I am looking forward to your detailed explanation for why you have withheld almost half of the documents, which is required by the bill. Now, obviously, there are 3 million documents, so I didn't get through much. But one thing I didn't see was the client list that you said you had on your desk a year ago. I did, however, find a couple of important documents. An 86-page prosecution memo from the Southern District of New York and a draft indictment from Florida against Jeffrey Epstein's co-conspirators. For reasons that I cannot understand nor are permitted by the bill, they were still redacted, even for members of Congress. So, Ms. Bondi, will you commit right here to immediately providing those 2 documents in unredacted form to members of Congress? Not a complicated question.
Well, I guess it is for you because you have a law degree and those are privileged.
Okay, they're not privileged, but we will discuss that later. I also found an email that I have right here from Jeffrey Epstein to Ghislaine Maxwell that was unredacted, and it included notes of statements that Donald Trump made about his prior relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, there is no reason for this to be hidden from the American people. There is no privilege, there is no attorney-client privilege, and I see you're checking with your staff, and I can assure you, staff, this is not under attorney-client privilege because it was sent from Jeffrey Epstein to Ghislaine Maxwell. Will you commit to publicly providing the unredacted version of this so that the American people can understand the extent of Donald Trump's lies about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein?
You're about as good of a lawyer today as you were when you tried to impeach President Trump in 2016. Have you apologized for that in 2019?
So will you unredact this? Will you unredact this?
You were lead counsel on that. Privileged.
I'm asking you, will you unredact this?
Privileged.
Privileged, of course. I look forward to discussing this more. Now, these are obviously improper redactions.
And let me stop for a minute.
I'm talking.
If they're not privileged,
quiet.
Don't yell at me. If they're not
Mr. Chairman, would you stop the clock? This is on your time. It's not on Mr. Goldman.
Not
Even though
privileged,
you used your improper redactions,
you'll like my answer.
to
if we
continue
review
to
them and they're not
protect
privileged,
Donald
Time belongs to the
we will
member.
be happy to release them.
We'll
after
stop the
review.
clock. We'll stop the clock. Time belongs to the member. Go ahead.
even though you used improper redactions to protect Donald Trump and other predators associated with Jeffrey Epstein, you did the exact opposite thing with the survivors and victims of this scheme. So their identification information was really the only thing required to be redacted, and it was not. And it's clear this was not a mistake. This was not by accident. This was not because you only had 30 days when you really used 75, and that doesn't even include all the hours last March that you were redacting it. But I'll tell you why it's clear it wasn't a mistake. There is an email entitled Epstein Victim List. There are 32 names. One is redacted. 31 are not. So someone looked at it and decided to redact something. And I will tell you that that is clearly intentional to intimidate these survivors and victims. Now, in an interview last week...
How will you tell me that's intentional?
In an interview last week, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche...
You can't go off script.
...said that any victim that wants to speak with the department has done so, hopefully. Well, thanks to the incredibly brave people sitting here behind you, we can actually ask them if that's true. Now, would the survivors and victims who are here please stand up one more time? Just by show of hands, how many of you or your loved ones actually have met with the Department of Justice and provided testimony and and evidence? None. And of those of you who have not met, which is everyone, how many of you have reached out either individually or through a lawyer or representative to offer to provide testimony and evidence? All of them. And of those of you, all of you, who have reached out, how many of you were denied or ignored by the Department of Justice? All of them. And despite the shameful and despicable efforts by Ms. Bondi and her department to intimidate you, how many of you are still willing to speak to the Department of Justice? All of them. Well, Ms. Bondi, it looks like you have some more witnesses
Gentleman's
to
time has
talk
expired.
to, and I yield back.
We will go to the good gentleman from North Carolina, Congressman Knott.
Thank
May
you.
I have a moment, Congressman?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Here we go. Here's the photograph. This is why he wanted to repeat everything that had been said previously on Epstein. This is his state, New York. You probably don't even know who this is. Wahid Mohammed from Afghanistan.
Yes, because I'm no longer a prosecutor.
Convicted of assault. Wow, he represents New York. Wow, yet he doesn't care about the illegal aliens convicted of crimes. Assault and homicide. No longer a prosecutor, so he doesn't care about his constituents. Here we go. Arson, El Salvador, Miguel Palacios. Fermin Flores Ramales, Mexico, rape.
Let's talk about the 70%
And the moment
of-
Goldman started reading from what he found, it became obvious. Something in those files wasn't supposed to be seen. He opened calmly, almost controlled, explaining that he had spent hours reviewing materials at the Department of Justice. Not summaries, not talking points. Actual files tied to Jeffrey Epstein's case. Millions of documents existed, he said. He didn't get through all of them. But what he did find was enough. Enough to expose a pattern. Enough to raise serious questions. And enough to put Pam Bondi directly on the spot. He pointed out that huge portions of these documents were still redacted, blacked out, even for members of Congress. That alone didn't sit right with him. According to the law, those materials were supposed to be made available. So he asked something simple. Why are these still hidden? It wasn't a complicated question, but the response he got wasn't simple either. Instead of clarity, there was hesitation. Instead of explanation, there was deflection. And that's when the tone in the room shifted from formal to tense. Because Goldman wasn't just pointing out missing information, he was about to reveal what was inside it. He reached for one specific document. An email, not speculation, not rumor. A real email, sent from Jeffrey Epstein to Ghislaine Maxwell. And inside that email were notes. Notes describing statements that Donald Trump had made about his past relationship with Epstein. Let that sink in. An email from Epstein himself, referencing Trump's own words about their connection. And that email was redacted, key parts hidden, removed. Shielded. So Goldman did what anyone would do in that moment that he asked directly. Will you release the unredacted version? Will you allow the public to see it? Because there was no obvious legal reason to hide it. No attorney-client privilege. No confidential legal defense. Just two individuals exchanging information. But Bondi didn't explain any of that. She didn't break down the reasoning. She didn't clarify the legal argument. She repeated one word, privileged. Again, and again, and again. Each time sounding less convincing than the last, because the reality was obvious to anyone paying attention. This didn't fit the definition of privileged communication, and Goldman knew it. He even said it plainly. This isn't attorney-client privileged. There's no lawyer involved in this exchange. So what exactly is being protected here? And that's when things got even more uncomfortable, because Goldman wasn't finished, not even close. Up to that point, the focus had been on what was being hidden. But then he flipped the entire conversation to what was being exposed. Because while powerful names were being protected behind blacked-out pages, something very different was happening on the other side. The victims, the survivors, the people at the center of the Epstein case. According to the Department of Justice, redactions were necessary to protect them. That was the official explanation. That was the justification. But Goldman had proof that told a completely different story. That he described a document he found. Simple title, Epstein Victim List. 32 names. 32. And out of those 32, Only one was redacted. Point one, the other 31 names. Fully visible, fully exposed. Now think about that. Someone had to review that document. Someone had to make a decision. They looked at a list of victims and chose to hide one name, while leaving 31 completely unprotected. If that's not random, that's not a rushed mistake, that's a choice. And Goldman said it directly. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't oversight. This looked intentional. And in that moment, the room shifted again, because now this wasn't just about hidden emails or legal arguments. This was about people, real people, people who had already been through something traumatic, and now their identities were sitting in documents, exposed, while the names of powerful individuals remained hidden. And then Goldman did something that changed everything. He turned away from the documents and toward the audience. Because sitting behind Bondi were survivors, actual individuals connected to the case, not anonymous, not abstract, real. And he asked them a simple question. How many of you have met with the Department of Justice? How many of you have provided testimony or evidence? One by one, they responded. None, not a single person. Then he asked another question. How many of you tried to reach out? How many of you offered to cooperate? Every hand went up. Every single one. And then the final question. How many of you were ignored? How many of you never received a response? Again, every hand, all of them. No exceptions. And just like that, a statement made days earlier collapsed. Because according to Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, any victim who wanted to speak with the department had already done so. That's what he said publicly. But right there, in that room, a group of survivors proved otherwise without saying a single word. They reached out, they offered help, and they were ignored. And instead of protecting them, their names were exposed, while the powerful figures connected to the case remained hidden behind redactions. At that point, the focus wasn't just on documents anymore. It was on accountability, and Bondi was still sitting there, without a clear answer. She didn't address the contradiction. She didn't explain why those victims were ignored. She didn't justify the redactions. Instead, she waited. She waited for something very specific. Time. Because once Goldman's time expired, she had the opportunity to respond. And what she did next caught everyone off guard. Instead of addressing the Epstein documents, instead of explaining the redactions, she changed the subject completely. She reached for a stack of mugshots, photos, and began talking about immigration, about individuals from other countries accused of crimes, names, charges, completely unrelated to the question she had just been asked. The shift was immediate, sharp, and obvious, because this wasn't a continuation of the discussion. This was a pivot, a deflection, a move away from uncomfortable questions towards something else entirely. And in doing that, she avoided answering the core issue, the email, the redactions, the victims. None of it was addressed. Instead, the focus moved somewhere else. And for anyone watching, the contrast was impossible to ignore. Because just moments earlier, the conversation had been about documents tied to one of the most high-profile cases in recent history. And now, it wasn't. And that raises a bigger question. Why? Why avoid the answer? Why shift the topic? Why not simply explain the reasoning behind the redactions? Because at this point, it wasn't just about one email. It wasn't just about one document. There was something else, something Goldman brought up that added another layer to this entire situation. Something Bondi herself had said before. Months earlier, during an interview, she made a claim. She said that a client list connected to Epstein, was sitting on her desk, ready to be reviewed. That statement got attention, because if true, it meant there was documentation identifying individuals connected to Epstein's network. But now, months later, Goldman had gone through the files, and he couldn't find it. Not mentioned, not included, not referenced. So he asked her directly, "Where is it? The list you said you had, where is it now?" And once again, there was no clear answer, which creates a contradiction. Either that list existed, and it's now missing, or it never existed, and the original statement wasn't accurate. Either way, the question remains, what changed? Because going from "it's on my desk" to "it's nowhere in the documents" isn't a small shift, it's a major one. And it feeds into a larger pattern that was already being discussed. Information tied to powerful individuals, hidden. Information tied to victims, exposed. And cooperation from those victims, ignored. That pattern is what made this exchange so intense. Because it wasn't just about one moment. It was about everything surrounding it: the documents, the responses, the contradictions, and the unanswered questions. And at the center of all of it was a simple issue: transparency. What should be public and what shouldn't? What gets revealed and what stays hidden? And who decides? Because when you step back and look at the entire situation, it becomes clear that something isn't lining up. You have an email that doesn't qualify as privileged, but is treated like it is. You have a document labeled victim list, where most names are left exposed. You have survivors who actively tried to cooperate, but were never contacted. And you have a statement about a client list that now seems to have disappeared entirely. Each of these points alone would raise concerns, but together, they paint a much bigger picture. And that's why this moment stood out. Because it wasn't just dramatic. It wasn't just loud. It revealed something deeper, something that goes beyond one hearing. And that's exactly why people are paying attention. Because the questions didn't get answered. They only got bigger. Why was that email hidden? Why were those names exposed? Why were those victims ignored? And where is that list? Those are the questions that didn't go away when the hearing ended. Those are the questions that are still being asked. And until there are clear answers, they're not going anywhere. Because moments like this don't just fade. They build, they spread, and they leave people thinking. Thinking about what they just saw. Thinking about what it means, and thinking about what might come next. Because if this is what was revealed in just a few hours of reviewing documents, what else is still out there? What else hasn't been seen yet? And what happens if it is? That's the part no one can answer right now. But it's the part everyone is watching. And if you want more breakdowns like this, where we cut through the noise and focus on what actually matters, make sure you hit subscribe, drop a like, and let me know what you think in the comments. Because conversations like this are just getting started.